Are you seeing more payment disputes arise from the lack of detailed contracts between either the general and the principal or the general and the subs? Is that really because it's a gray area, so nobody really knows what the rules of engagements are? Because I know, when we started building a construction company, no different than when we were in real estate, we come to you for a contract. We don't just have the proposal signed, and your question's always, well, how long can it be? And I try to go with the answer of as long as it needs to be. Right, but a lot of people are like, one page, just make it easy and cover everything that could go wrong in one page. And we certainly don't do that. We like to be
you have very thorough contract.
Very clear that says, here's what we're going to provide, here's the expectations that we have of the client and that the client should have of us. And then if it doesn't work, here's the process in which we're going to work to resolve any of those communication issues.
So, you've just asked a bunch of things, but it is funny because in the legal profession, we always joke that the clients want to be 100% protected and they want it to be one page. What they didn't tell us is the type size, right? So, all right, I can do that, but the type size is going to be 1.
You need a microscope. A microscope.
So, the contract we drafted for you is a very detailed, very thorough contract, right? But 20-some years of practice, almost 30, the problem is the lack of specificity in the contract. Projects that move forward with a bid, with a couple specifications, with a rough drawing, those always end in a disaster, right? The more detailed your contract, the better off for all of the parties. Now, oddly enough, this is something the homeowners don't understand. The contractors like a more vague document, generally speaking. The homeowners are protected by these large documents, but I've often found that when you present the homeowner with a large document, they get intimidated, right? They seem to want that picture of the house with a price next to it and nothing more. So yes, the detail in the contract is key. The lack of detail is what causes most disputes, right?
But let's clarify that real quick, because we have a lot of detail within the legalese or the verbiage of our contract, but are you specifically referring back to the specifications and the selections of the materials, the model numbers, all of the addenda, so to speak, that would come with the actual detailed scope of work with the list of materials being used?
Yeah, well, let's use your contract, for example, right? Your contract contains both. Your contract has what you would call the legalese, right? But there's a lot of important stuff in that legalese, which protects the parties by setting forth the parties' rights and obligations beforehand. So we know who has to do what and when. And so that's very helpful. Now that legalese relates to the other part of your contract, which is the various detailed plans and specifications and allowances, if that's the nature of the project. So yes, we have a sheet that has the allowances. Yes, we have a sheet that has the specifications, the materials we're going to build with, etc. But then we also want to talk about what happens when we decide to change the color, change the tile, the nature of the flooring, etc. And that's where that legalese comes in. And so I consider your contract the perfect combination, right? It's got a lot of legalese, as you would call it, but it has a lot of specification. Now, I didn't draft the specification because that is unique to each house, right? So that's up to you to make sure that that specification is in the right place, in the right form. But the contract as envisioned, when prepared, is a very thorough and protective document for all the parties involved.
Right. So the short answer is the easy road, whether that be from the client's perspective of a one-page contract with the price tag next to a picture of the house, which also would be easy for the contractor, is pretty much the worst thing you can do. Taking the time to plan up front and work through with the client all the details of the job, how things are going to happen, the timelines, the specifics on the materials being used, and really going through, instead of a one-pager, you might have a 9 to 10 page contract with another 9, 10, 12, 15 pages of specifications, so that everybody knows what's being used in the house and what's going to be installed in the way that it should look.
Yeah. One thing I think people don't grasp is, and this comes up all the time when I have homeowners in dispute with their contractor, is they don't grasp the nature of the relationship they entered into, right? We're talking about, if we're talking about somebody building their residence, right? We're talking about somebody's house. Right, so people generally have an emotional attachment to the house, and for good reason, right? It's very important to their life. It's where their children live, or grew up, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this concept with our house. We have this relationship with our house. Then we bring in this outside party to work on our house, right? And there's all kind of legal issues that can come up with that. And we mentioned the mechanics lien right. So if the contractor isn't paid, they may have lien rights against that property. What that means is it's not really easy to make your contractor go away, right? If there's a dispute, it can throw everything into limbo for the duration of the dispute. Maybe the house can't be finished for the duration of the dispute because maybe the house is the evidence needed for the dispute and we don't want to complete it until it's been thoroughly inspected and photographed and looked at by expert witnesses, et cetera, et cetera.
So you could be camping in your house.
You could be camping in your house, right? Well, that's the description. So the concept of a good document with good specifications is to make sure that we're ahead of these problems that can come up, right? Because unlike your car mechanic, who you can just fire, unlike your launderer, right? You can just not go to again, right? Once you're in that relationship with the general contractor, once they've come in your house and they've started working on your house, that relationship is almost, it's not a partnership from a legal perspective, right? But it is a partnership from a relationship perspective because the homeowner and the contractor are tied together. And it is so important, like in a good partnership, in a good friendship, that you have trust in the other person. It's very important that you have that same close relationship with your contractor. And because you don't know this contractor before they walk through the door, a lot of that trust or ability to rely on them has to be contained in that contract, right? These are what your rights are. These are what your duties are. This is what I'll do for you. Obviously, in a friendship over 20 years, you don't have a list of duties and rights that's written down, but two friends know that, right? A husband and a wife may not have that written down, but it's an unspoken relationship. And you're bringing a contractor in, and it's going to be a very close relationship like that, but you don't have 20 years of establishing the rules, and that's what that contract is for, is to help establish the rules by which that very close relationship, a relationship that's very hard to sever in an instance, right? The rules by which that relationship will be governed.
Yeah, because you even have, the guidelines from what meets and workman standards from the ROC perspective are
minimum,
basically as wide as the state of Arizona.
Right.
It's ridiculous. So they're there to protect the public, but you really, really have to do something wrong in order for that to come into play.
So the word there is minimum workmanship standards. Right. The ROC is looking for the minimum standard that's acceptable. So the standards for a $75,000 house are certainly not the standard somebody building a multi-million-dollar property would like to see put into their property. Right. So,
but does the ROC distinguish between the two?
The ROC makes no distinction. Minimum workmanship.
Minimum across the board. When a homeowner's meeting with a contractor or intervening contractors, and then we're talking about that level of relationship being created, it's really about the more time up front, the better. The more detail, the more conversation, the more planning, the more all of these things happen up front, which can be understandably frustrating for the client because they're like, hey, I want to do my kitchen or I want to build this house and time is of the essence and, I got to be out of this house or whatever it is. But the faster you move without doing due diligence and really getting to know someone, the greater the likelihood of having problems are or a dispute. But because the reality is stuff's going to go sideways a little bit on every project, right? Construction's not perfect. Maybe a little easier on a new build because you get the set of plans and short of having unforeseen soil issues, but even with that, there's a lot of soil testing that goes into a house before you build it. But in the world of renovation, where you might be taking a home that's 1950, 60, 70, and then trying to bring part of it or most of it up to 2019, but still working within the shell. There's all kinds of things that'll come up that really nobody could account for, and certainly it wouldn't be a good thing for a contractor to account for all the things that could go wrong up front because it would just inflate this bid to a huge number where most of it wouldn't go wrong. So it's really not if something's going to come up that's a challenge, maybe not necessarily a dispute, but things are going to come up, and so you have to be able to sit down and rumble through that with the contractor and the homeowner. And get a resolution to little things that will come up. So if you don't take the time to get to know someone up front, and really the more documentation the contractor can provide, the better. It's not the opposite. It's not lean and mean. The less there is, as far as the documentation, the specificity.
That's right.
The worse it is.
The worse it is in the long run. Right. So obviously, the contractor can never draft around all potential contingencies with a 30-year-old house. You never know what you're going to find when you open the walls, right? So you can have but you can have contract language that addresses how we're going to address that when it occurs, right? But yeah, it's the classic example of starting construction without knowing what you're building, right? And you get halfway through the project, and then someone decides they want a particular feature that requires you to undo stuff that's already been done. Well, now that's done. You're still paying for everything that's already been done. Yep. You don't subtract the price from the contract because you tore it out. Right. That adds to the price of the contract, both the original installation and the tearing it out. And of course, these are issues homeowners don't necessarily grasp, right? And then,
well, nor should they. I mean, they're not a professional.
That's correct. But you end up with this fight where the contractor's like, well, you should have told me that beforehand, with the homeowners telling the contractor, you should have told me that earlier. The contractor's like, well, you're the one who wanted to go quickly, and it ends up in a very ugly situation. Now, generally at the ROC, the state will place the burden on the contractor, right? The problem is to get this resolution. Again, puts the homeowner's life on hold, and of course the homeowner has to file legal counsel for this fight, and there's costs involved there. And all of these problems can be avoided to a great degree with proper preparation, proper discussion about the scope of the work, and then proper documentation of what is going to be built and how we're going to deal with it, what you'd call legalese, if we deviate from the to-be-built plans and specifications. So I can't tell you, I cannot emphasize enough how happy I am with a nice big construction contract and a nice detailed set of plans. And the lawyers, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, when this dispute is in the hands of the lawyers, what they're going to be saying on the phone, that everybody was willing to go forward without knowing what was being built, it just makes the lawyer's case impossible to fight, right? What was to be built? There are no plans. There are no specifications, right? What was the price of this feature going to be that you verbally said was discussed but didn't make it into any documents and doesn't have a price tag attached to it? Those are all the prime causes of disputes, right? Okay, something that's obvious. You pay the contractor and he takes the money and flees to Costa Rica. But that doesn't happen that often, right? Normally you have
not with licensed guys, at least.
Right, not with licensed guys. Normally you have a contractor who's just moving a little too fast because the client wants it, or the contractor's trying to please the client by putting the cart in front of the horse, by starting the project before the plans are finalized. But that, unless the plans catch up, sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't.
Usually they don't,
right? Yeah. Because now we're into construction, we're moving forward. Boy, that's just where problems come up.
So it's really about the whole relationship can be founded and tested within the level of preparation that happens.
That's correct. Yeah.
Between the owner and the contractor, because it's got to be a two-way street, right? It's not just about the homeowner saying you're the contractor for me. It's got to be the other way around, because it's not always a fit. It could be oil and water for any number of reasons. And then from there, once you kind of got that baseline that, it's a good fit, to solidify that, to make sure that as you get into this $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, or $1 million, multi-million-dollar build, depending on how big the development might be, it's about the detail up front and the time up front that everybody takes to plan.
Right, and so you just threw those numbers out, and that just made me think. Earlier, I talked about the difference between constructing a lower end house and a high end house, but in the remodel world, it's the same concept. Doing a $50,000 remodel project on a low end house and a $50,000 remodel project on a high end house still meets the same minimum standard of workmanship, right? So even though you're working in a very high end house, the state through the ROC is still only going to be holding to that lowest level. And that's where the plans and specifications come in, because ideally your plans and specifications will talk about the nature of the work, the nature of the plaster that's going to be put in, the nature of the tile that's going to be put in, et cetera. The paints that are going to be used, et cetera.
So from that point then, we know the ROC is still there to protect the public, but it's a really broad stroke, if you will,
Yes.
that they rule within. And so then I guess my question would be, then why would I even bother having a licensed contractor come aboard? Other than, my opinion on that, at least up front, is only some licensed contractors are really taking the time to have that detailed contract and the scope of work generally,
Yes.
because it's hard work.
Yes.
It takes a lot of time, right? And time is money, and
Yes.
Everybody's busy, but that's the market today. The market will cycle, and then people won't be as busy. So taking the time up front with a licensed contractor who's also got all of these other things in place with the details, but then an unlicensed guy, personally, I don't know, but have you ever seen anyone use an unlicensed guy, or has anything gotten to you as far as an unlicensed guy that went to that level of documentation, or is it kind of
No.
go with when they're unlicensed, you're just in the Wild West, and that's kind of...
So licensed versus unlicensed, right? So first of all, lots of people use unlicensed folks
Sure.
to do minor projects around the house.
Yeah.
You grab people in the Home Depot parking lot on the weekend to help move some rock or something like that. So the Arizona licensing scheme envisions that, these small handyman projects get to be done if it's under a certain dollar figure. But, somebody helping you move some landscaping, et cetera, can only do so much damage to your house. And so we're talking about the overall theory here is like risk mitigation, right? So the risk from a small handyman project is relatively minor, right? Even if they screw it up, you can get your kids out there with the shovel and they can fix the problem, right? So, as the project scope enlarges, right, the risk of it being done wrong increases significantly, right? An improperly framed house, an improperly built roof, improper trusses will have a significant negative impact compared to a small project, right? So as the project increases in scope, the risk gets greater. The reason we use licensed contractors is to help mitigate the risk, right? You commented that not all contractors are equal. That's absolutely true, right? Not all contractors have proper insurance. Not all contractors have their workers' comp in place. Not all contractors have, now they're all going to have their bonds in place,
Sure.
right? But the bond is a minor dollar figure for the nature of the damage that can be done. So why are we using a licensed contractor? Well, the number one reason we use a licensed contractor is because they know what they're doing, right? Because they've been tested, because they have experience, because they have knowledge, right? You can't become a licensed contractor without a certain amount of experience. So it's not like you can just say, hey, I'm a teacher today and tomorrow I want to be a general contractor. You have to work in the industry, you have to demonstrate that to the state. So the first thing is, when you hire a licensed contractor, you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing. Now, most contractors have been background checked, et cetera, so that's an additional thing. But the contractors have employees, so that's not necessarily the sole reason to hire the kind of the home security.
Right.
But the general contractor is going to have his bond. I'm going to say you want to use a general contractor who has insurance. Now, there are general contractors out there who don't have insurance, but I generally discourage the use of that type of person. And as you know, the construction contract we use that I drafted for you puts certain insurance requirements on you and insurance requirements on the homeowner, right? And on a side note, people always come to me and they're like, I want you to draft my entities so that I'm protected, right? I want protection. And the first thing I always tell them is you don't find the greatest degree of protection at the lawyer's office. You find the greatest degree of protection at your insurance broker's office, right? Insurance is how the modern world deals with all of the risks, not all of the risks, but most of the risks that are going to come up in a particular field. And in this particular issue, it's going to be with problems with construction, right? So number one, I like my clients to only work with contractors who have insurance, and you have the insurance, and that's a requirement we've placed on you in your documents, right? So that's the general insurance. Someone gets hurt on the project, insurance to cover the nature of the work being done, insurance to cover the workers' comp insurance to cover the employees or the subcontractors working on the project. So if something goes wrong, there's a fallback. Now, in this licensed, unlicensed selection, people are looking, obviously that adds cost. Having all of that
Sure.
insurance adds cost, right?
Expensive.
So in the risk reduction world, right, we're paying a little more to have coverage, to have protection in the event any of these risks occur. Now we can roll the dice and hope nothing wrong happens. But when you roll that dice and something wrong does happen, there's literally no place to turn if you're using unlicensed contractors.
And I mean, at some point, I mean, it's inevitable, right? It's not an if.
It's inevitable.
It's a dangerous job. There's heights, there's climbing, there are tools that can cut a hand off. Like
Yes.
it can happen like that. No different than a car accident, really. It's just more of a matter of time.
Yeah.
Something will happen eventually.
So you're talking about injuries to people, workers' comp, and so that's one of the natures of one of the types of insurance I'm talking about. It's possible that while the contractor is working on your property, he damages something else, right? Something he wasn't there to work on. Maybe he backs into your car. Maybe he knocks your garage door off its hinges. You know, you never know. Breaks a pipe he wasn't supposed to break and floods your house. So there's types of damage that can occur that have nothing to do with the work the contractor is there to do, right? And then there's damage, defective work to the work the contractor is doing, right? Which is different than the other stuff we've just discussed. And these are all different types of insurance that your contractor can carry. So I like, and as our documents provide, I like for all of that insurance to be in place, right? Because we just discussed different types of risks that can occur, and we just discussed the remedy to those risks. And if somebody causes $100,000 or $200,000 damage to a property, there's a lot of general contractors out there who are way out of business.
Oh yeah.
If they had to come out of pocket that much money.
Totally agree.
Right.
That's a lot of money to come out of pocket for one repair.
Even if they're licensed, without the insurance, there's no recovery for the homeowner. Using an unlicensed party, there's absolutely no insurance. There's no regulatory agencies to oversee the work. If there's damage, that's purely on the homeowner's tab.
Right.
If you use a licensed contractor who is not insured, right, you hope that they're operating at a higher level. You hope that that license reduces the risk, right? It doesn't provide coverage in the event the risk we're trying to avoid occurs, but it reduces the probability that the risk occurs, right? And then the highest level is using a licensed contractor who's properly insured. So we are eliminating the probability of the risk occurring by the use of the licensed contractor. And then we are eliminating the risk of the loss by having the insurance in place, right? So, but of course all of that adds costs. So, you know, that's a calculus individual people make. As we know, there's a wanted list of unlicensed contractors that the Arizona Registrar of Contractors keeps out there, and they have it on their website, right? The 10 most wanted list. It's an amusing little list. And you have to wonder, how are these guys still working? How are people who, if you search them on the internet, are identified for screwing up projects and are under criminal indictment in some cases for contracting without a license, which, by the way, is a crime, right? And yet people are still hiring them. And we know the answer, because they're cheap, right? But if you read why they're under indictment, you read a list of homeowners they've damaged, homeowners who have no recourse, who have no remedy other than coming out of pocket themselves for the damage to their property, right? Maybe it's money advanced and the work wasn't done. Maybe it was money advanced and the work was done in a poor manner, right? Maybe money was advanced, the work was done, but other damage was committed, right? Maybe the money was advanced and the work was done and they used some laborers on the project and they got hurt, and they're now suing the homeowner for under some workers' comp claim because there was no workers' comp in their project.
But for me, that's the number one thing that, you know, scares me as far as the risk as the business owner.
Yes.
From the general liability standpoint, I mean, I feel like we use really high quality trades, and I feel like we deliver, you know, high quality product. There's certainly challenges where we'll come back, we'll make adjustments or fix things, and you know, that's just the nature of retrofit and remodel in the world that we work within. But yeah, it's that injury, right? The guy that missteps and isn't paying attention, and he's on a roof and falls off the roof, or didn't have fall protection for some reason, or really small stuff, not using safety glasses. When you've got a saw run, you get a piece of metal in your eye, or I mean, any number of things that could happen. I mean, that's the big one. I mean, for us in the workers' comp's the single most expensive insurance we carry. It feels like a small fortune to pay the premium every year and then not have a claim, but it pales in comparison to, you know, us not carrying that insurance and not having our guys and not requiring it of our vendors or our subs, because we want our subs to have it as well. and then somebody really getting hurt, and in the worst case scenario, maybe somebody dying in an accident, which happens from time to time. You see it on the news at a national
Yes.
level. Someone is in a hole and the hole collapses, something really terrible. But like the cost of that actually rolls a little bit uphill, right?
Uphill. Yeah.
So it goes from
It rolls uphill. So we think of, we always think of, well, I have to take care of my employees, but I don't have to take care of my independent contractors. And I've hired this guy, and he's an independent contractor.
Right.
He's a subcontractor. I'm not responsible for him. But it's not that bright. The law does not have that bright line test, right? The law looks at the totality of the circumstances. So a homeowner who hires unlicensed individuals to work on their house may very well find themselves getting sued for injuries to those people. Now, maybe they can prevail in the lawsuit 2 years down the road, or maybe they can't. And maybe they have coverage for it, and maybe they can't, right? But it's not a question of, I only hired them to do that project. That doesn't mean they're not your employee for purposes of the law.
Right.
So homeowners can easily find themselves the targets of lawsuits by these unlicensed individuals working on their property. Right? In fact, you often think there might even be a little bit of a scam out there with these unlicensed guys doing the work only with the goal of trying to make some kind of frivolous claim against the homeowner to settle it down the road. Because we've seen those on a small scale, right? Now, the goal is, again, like my homeowners, I want them to hire a general contractor who has their workers' comp insurance, right? Now, the general hires the subs, and we want those subs to have workers' comp insurance. Although, the real reason the general wants the subs to have workers' comp insurance is because it helps defray the cost of the workers' comp insurance. But if those subs don't have workers' comp insurance and those workers get hurt,
our policy covers
they're
it.
just coming after the general,
Yep.
right? And so so from a homeowner's perspective, we want a workers' comp policy out there somewhere. Now, we don't really care whether it's at the general level or at the sub level. But the ideal situation is you want your general to have it, right? Because at that level, if someone gets hurt, you don't want to be getting sued. You want your general to have it, and as a good policy, the general should only be using subs who have it, and that's from an economic perspective, right? Because it's going to drive down the cost of the general's workers' comp insurance, but of course it drives up the cost of the work being performed by the subcontractor because they're carrying their own workers' comp insurance. Homeowners are, I think, oblivious to the risk of unlicensed people working on their house, right? And we like to think, well, the guy fell off the roof because he was an idiot, right? Well, he's going to say he fell off your roof because your roof was improperly constructed, or he was not warned, or what have you. Now, will you prevail on that as a homeowner? Maybe, right? Will your homeowner's insurance cover it? Maybe, right? But again, is the homeowner? So the thing I think people don't. I think lay people don't give enough consideration to, which is there's really two components to the lawsuit, right? I said earlier, nearly all lawsuits settle. And if you have insurance and it settles, that's all great, right? And so we normally look at the outcome of the lawsuit, and we focus on that. I don't want to get sued for $1 million and lose, right? But I think what people don't give enough credence to is the idea of, I don't want to be in a lawsuit for 2 years.
For sure, because you still got to pay for it.
And I don't want to be awake at night worrying about that pile of papers my lawyer sent me he said I had to read and fill out the questions and respond to him by next week, right? And I don't want to worry about being deposed, and I don't want to worry about my wife being deposed, and I don't want them coming to my house. I don't want a bunch of lawyers I don't know coming to my house, and I'm tired of getting these monthly bills, right? Now, let's assume the bills are being covered by their insurance company, right? And so for this purpose, I'm discounting the financial burden of litigation, right? I'm merely talking about the emotional burden of being in litigation. And I can't tell you how many times. Now, I go to court all the time, right? I'm driving down the road, got my client sitting next to me, we're going down for something quick. It's meaningless. It's a meaningless hearing. And I go to court all the time. I look over at my client, and they're like grabbing the armrest, and they've got no blood flow in their face. And I think maybe they haven't breathed for 3 minutes, And then you remember, what? Lay people are not in the business of going to court. It can be intimidating. It can be nerve-wracking. It induces anxiety, right? I always remember a client who took a cruise right before their depositions. This was a construction dispute on a very high-end home. They did not. It was over $1 million contract, And at the end of the day, the dispute was, we said we owed, I think, $55,000 still to close out the contract, and they said they owed $75,000, right? And the two lawyers got on the phone and we're like, look, let's settle it for $65,000. You come up 10, we'll come down 10, we'll call it a day. No money spent on legal fees, nothing, right? Both I and the other guy thought that was a great idea. Both of our clients said, hell no. Not a penny more, not a penny less, right? The other lawyer writes a letter, we owe them $125,000. I do the numbers, I'm like, oh my gosh, we don't owe $55,000. We've overpaid by $35,000, right? So the lawyers have done their job. We've taken this dispute that we tried to resolve, right? The two lawyers had a conversation. I know the guy, he knows me. We know exactly what's coming over the next couple years, right? We tried to do an amicable resolution. Clients would have none of it. They had too much, spit and vinegar in them at the time. So we start the litigation. My clients have their deposition scheduled. As you recall, the deposition is where you go into a room and the other attorneys get to ask you questions. And it can be brutal, and your deponent can end up crying. Your client ends up crying because the other people are not nice. They're there to destroy you.
Yeah. It's like being interrogated for a major crime.
It's an interrogation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not
recorded.
Deposition's the politically correct word for it.
Deposition is right. It's the other side's opportunity to interrogate you. Right. So they went on a cruise about a week or two before their deposition, and they came back, and I asked them how their cruise was, and they were like, it was horrible. I was like, well, what happened? And they're like, we couldn't taste any of the food, we couldn't sleep. We couldn't enjoy any of the events. Why? And their answer was, all we could think about was our depositions that were hanging over our head, right? Like, oh my gosh, now that's a layperson's view of litigation, right? And I think homeowners do not give enough credence to what happens if this relationship goes wrong, right? And they don't select their contractor with that in mind, right? They select based on price as opposed to who is the professional, right? Who is properly structured, proper insurance, who's going to move the ball from A to Z in a proper manner, and if there's any disputes that come up are going to be resolved internal to the construction process, without the need for lawyers, without the need for litigation, without getting the registrar contractors involved. Right? And that's because I don't think people give enough credence to the emotional tolls. And on a side note, my partners and I, we probably have a bunch of clients who owe us these little small tabs here and there, and we often have clients who come in and they want us to try to collect on something small. And we're like, well, you could walk away. And they're like, oh no, that's my money. Right? And I'm like, okay. And here's what it's going to cost. And they're like, oh my gosh, okay, well, let's do it, And they're like, well, you're lucky because you can sue for free, right? And I know very few lawyers who sue who chase those little matters, right? And it's because we live in the system, right? It's not the money that's at issue. It's the time and trouble of being in the system that lawyers learn to appreciate, right? That I think the lay people don't. Now, obviously, general contractors at some point have had enough experience with the ROC and maybe some type of litigation that they, for one reason or another, that they have a better appreciation of the turmoil and the risks and the toll that litigation takes. But I think homeowners focus on the price. This is a lot of times, not all the times. They focus on the price. Sometimes they end up in the hands of an unlicensed contractor. Sometimes they end up in the hands of a contractor who's licensed but not properly structured, not insured, etc. And instead of ending up in the hands of the professional who's properly structured and is prepared to address the risks as they occur, as opposed to force them off to some type of litigation down the road.
So in short, if you're a client looking to have a project done that's more than a cleanup or the basic stuff that, like, for example, it's really hard to structurally mess up a house to have paint done.
Yeah.
Right? And not that we would condone unlicensed vendors, but there's some things that realistically a homeowner can get away with and they'll be fine. Like, it's a non-issue, right?
That's right.
But when you're looking to have work done, it really comes down to, you want the contractor to be very detailed. You want a big contract
Yeah.
that covers both parties. You want to have a lot of planning in detail, and there should be meetings up front. And before you even pull up to the site with a truck and tools and do something that's dirty and dusty, and you start that process, it's really made, the whole project's made or broken up front. And the level of planning and the detail and then really disclosure.
That's correct.
And so anyone who's shortening this ultimately is, the shorter this is, the longer and more painful your project's going to be versus take the time to do it up here and then jump into your project and it flies a lot faster.
Yeah, you can get lucky. You can have a project that you have no planning, nothing in advance, and everything just comes together and there's no problems, right? This gets back to what I said earlier, which is it's all about managing the risk in the project, and there's different types of risk, right? You mentioned it's hard to screw up when painting. Yeah, if you're hiring some unlicensed laborers to help you paint the wall in your backyard, that's not a big deal, right? You start painting your whole house, well, slightly different deal because maybe they're on ladders, maybe they can fall off the ladder. But generally speaking, I would agree with you that some types of painting jobs don't have a lot of risk if it goes wrong, right? Why? Because you can redo it. You can bring your kids home and throw some sheets on the ground and tape it off and repaint yourself, right? I can repaint. I can paint a room, right? Now, do I want to work on my electrical panel? Probably not, right? Do I want to be up on the top of my house putting tile on the roof with the one ladder I own? Probably not, right? Because I would not feel safe in the process, right? So again, because we're talking about different types of projects with different risks in the project. So yes, a simple project, do whatever you want, right? You don't have to go overboard on a simple project. You don't have to hire an international construction company to paint the block wall you just put in, the decorative wall in your front yard. But as the project gets greater in risk, it increases in scope, it increases in the nature of the risk. And the risk doesn't just mean physical harm. The risk can be the cost to redo it, right? So the cost to repaint is different than the cost to relay the tile you've imported from Italy, right?
At $100 a square foot.
Right, at $100 a square foot. So if that's done wrong, the risk is significantly greater than the risk of putting some linoleum down in a bathroom.
Right. 40, 50 cents a foot.
So again, the risk is a multifaceted analysis, right? But really, the risk just means anything that can go wrong that I'm going to have to pay to fix later, or maybe I can't fix it later. But anything, any type of negative outcome is the risk we're trying to avoid, whether it's physical or monetary, et cetera. So anyway, that's my assessment. It's all about assessing the risk. The greater the risk, the greater the importance of hiring the licensed contractor, of having your documentation prepared beforehand so you know what's being done and what the rules are for what's being done, right? How do we make changes? What is the cost of a change? That's the kind of stuff, those are common problems in these residential projects. So anyways, that's, I would agree with you that on the risk, but I would view it in the risk concept.
Cool. Well, I think that's about all I have as far as questions go. So I appreciate your time, and devil's in the details.
Devil's in the details.